What's up, guys? How's Big Rona treating everybody? I'm not sure I get to call it by the official name. I don't know if YouTube will flag me for being too controversial. Thanks, freedom of speech. Anyways, checking in with you all to see how you're handling quarantine and chill, or the end of the world, whatever you want to call it. Doing a quick video about rent strike, right? I'm sure you've seen, especially if you're a landlord or interested in investing in real estate, or even just a renter, like I have been my entire life until the last year. I have been a renter who rented from apartments or a house or a duplex. I rented my entire life, and I grew up in a very, very poor family. We lived in trailer parks and crappy apartments. That's just a little bit about me. But I bet you've been paying attention to rent strike, right? In the Seattle where I work, on the 45th Street overpass overhanging the freeway, big old banner that says rent strike, April 1st, right? We're not paying those landlords, those dirt bags. Well, they may be dirt bags, but let's talk about that for a second, okay? I think, honestly, first of all, that a lot of this rent strike just comes from being afraid. And we should empathize and sympathize with those people, because this is a very real thing to be afraid about. You know, what's happening right now in our economy, what's happening right now in our country. I just listened to a story on the radio a little bit earlier today about a guy who opened up a business 17 days before the shutdown went into effect here in Washington. A little local guy in Puyallup, Washington, opened up a restaurant, wanted to for a long time, opens it up, 17 days later gets shut down. How's that guy make it, right? I mean, come on, you know? How could you not be afraid? How could you not empathize with that person? So why can't we as landlords, which I am a landlord now, right? I went to the dark side, whatever you want to call it. After all this time of being a renter, man, my heart goes out to renters. And I'm here to explain why they have a really valid point and why landlords should probably listen to what they have to say and do their best to help them out. But also maybe why a renter or a tenant might want to consider the landlord's point of view as well. So I think the first thing we have to do is we do have to agree that there's, you know, not all tenants are created equal. Not all landlords are created equal. I have rented from big apartment complexes where the landlords were dirtbags who took your entire deposit because they had to fix so many things after you moved out, when you're like, bro, I didn't even break anything. Or you maybe have had a tenant who was like, oh yeah, it's just me and my wife living here. 7 cars and 8 unregistered adults on the frickin' lease later. You're like, yeah, I think maybe there's more than 2 people living in this household, but gosh, they just don't want to admit to it. But when I was over there, because they punched 6 holes in the wall and their next door neighbor said I should come check it out, I just found a bunch of people sleeping on the couch, right? We can agree there's bad tenants, there's good tenants. There's bad landlords, there's slumlords and dirtbag landlords, right? Why can't we all aspire to be the good tenant and the good landlord? I think we can. And a good tenant could be getting screwed over by what's happening in our country right now, and we should empathize with them and try our best to figure out how to support them. And tenants, you should also want to support your landlord. Not literally like it's your job or something to pay for their family. It's not, but it's your job to adhere to the contract that you signed to the best of your ability, right? The best of your ability. If you're still working, please pay your rent, right? Come on. If you're not working because you've been furloughed and you've been labeled non-essential by the government and your job has sent you home with no pay because you worked for some company that wasn't big enough or good enough to give you pay, yes, please, landlords, help this person out. But how? How do you help them out? And that is tricky, because the tenant, you know, the people who say we want rent strike, no more rent, right? Okay, I get you. You literally can't pay it. What option do you have? You cannot pay it. You're not working right now. For no fault of your own, you're not working. How are you supposed to pay your rent? You got to put food on the table for yourself and your kids, right? That's priority 1. Not getting Big Rona is probably priority 2. So how do you make ends meet, right? How do you do right by just society standards? Well, my recommendation would be to contact your landlord immediately and talk to them about the problems you're having and try to come up with solutions. Some of the solutions I offered to my tenant was, you know, what if we said no rent this month? And we take this month's rent, $2,000, and we divide that out over the remaining 8 months. So you just take 2,000 divided by 8. You pay a couple $100 extra a month over that. What if this goes on for 2 or 3 months? Well, what if we sign a new additional year-long lease? So we take your remaining 8 months, we add 12 more, so we have 20 months total. And we take these 2 or 3 months you can't pay rent, And we divide that out over those 20 months. So your rent goes up a little bit over that time, right? That's one option. Could be a good option for you. What if we let you out of the lease early? No penalties, nothing wrong. We'll just let you out of the lease early, right? But people still got to have a place to leave, and not everybody can just pick up and go. What if you got kids and a family, right? Well, that $1,200 government check, nobody's seen it yet. Who knows if it's going to show up, right? So what do you do to help this person out? What about partial rent? Now, you might be saying to yourself, why is it that landlords are always reluctant to take partial rent? Well, when things were normal back in the day, like 2 months ago, if you took partial rent, you couldn't evict somebody, right? If somebody paid, their rent's $2,000 a month and they gave you $500 and you take that $500, well, now you can't start your eviction process, right? Or at least it makes it a lot harder to in most areas. So landlords are usually very hesitant to take partial rent because it takes away their ability to evict a bad tenant. And I think we can agree that if someone doesn't pay rent, right, then that doesn't really make them a great tenant. I don't think that's controversial. Present Big Rona circumstances excluded, right? I'm talking about 3 months ago when someone didn't pay rent. I think we can agree that maybe that makes them a less than ideal tenant. The point of having, people rent from you is that they pay you and then you manage the properties, right? But yeah, could you do partial rent? Yeah, sacrifice your profit, help them out. Hopefully they can help you out. Maybe they can pay half the rent. Maybe they can pay a quarter of the rent. Maybe they can pay this month's rent, but they're not sure about next month's rent. Maybe you as a landlord are in a position where you can be extremely generous and say, hey, yeah, just don't worry about this month. We'll talk about it next month. And if you can, great, but most people can't. I read a funny meme the other day where a bunch of paycheck to paycheck renters renting from paycheck to paycheck landlords who are taking mortgages from paycheck to paycheck banks. Everybody's broke, right? And I mean, really, there's some truth to that, right? Now, I have enough cash in the bank right now to be able to pay for this entire property if I didn't receive a single dollar from my tenant, and if I lost my job, I could pay for it for a year straight, all my expenses for a year straight. That's not normal for most people. They recommend most people have 3 to 6 months of an emergency fund. I happen to have a whole bunch of extra cash set aside and saved up right now because I'm trying to buy a second property. But let's say I had just bought that property last month. Well, I wouldn't be quite zeroed out because I would never let myself get zeroed out, but I'd have spread myself pretty thin. And when you spread yourself thin and all of a sudden something happens, it can be real difficult. And the renter is scared because they can't make their rent. What if they get evicted? Well, the government came along and said, nope, no evictions for a few months. Well, that's good. But the landlord's sitting here saying, well, I'm not getting any rent. I can't make my mortgage payment. The government said no evictions. The government hasn't said that banks can't repossess your house. So I got 3 months to figure it out, or the bank's going to come in and evict me as the landlord. And you as the tenant should be very concerned about that, because if the landlord gets evicted, do you think that the banks are going to be on your side? The altruistic, greedy banks that will lie, cheat, and steal their way through any recession, bar none, right? Do you really think that the big corporate executive bank's going to have your back as the little tiny... No. They are waiting for the second that you can be evicted once again, and they will out of there as fast as they can. So you don't want your landlord to lose the properties, okay? Trust me, you don't. And the landlord doesn't want you not to pay. They also don't want to evict you because that's a whole messy process. And right now they can't, nor should they be trying to. What needs to happen is there needs to be a little bit of mutual understanding here from both sides. The people need to come together and work together and try to figure out a solution, because we're all in this freaking mess together, right? The Big Rona doesn't discriminate against anybody, rich, poor, young, old. Well, apparently maybe it does discriminate against elderly, but you know what the point I'm trying to make here, right? Anyways, guys, look, I appreciate you watching. I have faith in America. I have faith in people. I think the large majority of people are going to continue to do their absolute best to pay their rent. And I think the large majority of landlords are going to do their absolute best to help their tenants out. And that's all we can ask for, and that's all we can hope for. Be safe, be well, hey, and, try to be healthy.